Fam, so let's chat about the next thing. This is going to be kind of surprising, I think, for some people, but Vanessa and I have been talking about this for a long time, and I wanted to introduce it to you all because I think it's time to talk about this stuff. So I've been in Russia for about 3 years, and I've gotten to know a pretty rounded perspective that isn't, again, here on the TruthWire, we always look at things with nuance. We always look at things beyond the dual lens of just, black and white. We look at things a little bit more deeply. We expose things first. So I wanted to really bring this up regarding Russia, Ukraine, because I think I've not heard most analysts talk about it in this way. So obviously Russia has the upper hand in this, right? And I want to bring up I added an article, Jayme, because I just want to set the stage with this. Russia is pretty much encroaching Ukraine. We are seeing less and less Ukrainian bodies able to go to war and fight because there's literally, they're getting down to the last Ukrainians. I mean, even Angelina Jolie's security was taken recently, which made, the news, because how could he be taken? He thought he was beyond that. And so Russia has now pretty much advanced in several key cities, and they've advanced specifically, and they've encircled Ukraine in the city of Kupiansk in Ukraine's Kharkov region. And so last month, Vladimir Putin said that at least 10,000 Ukrainian soldiers had been surrounded. And this was not just in Kupiansk, but also in Pokrovsk, which is the other city that we have seen just entirely encircled by Russia, right? We're seeing things progress simultaneously. And this is now what's going on the military front, right? I'm not going to go too deep into that, because what I really want to talk more so about is what's going to happen as a result of all of this. So we have seen for the last year, since about February, since Donald Trump came into the presidency, essentially, conversations had between the United States and Russia on ending the war in Ukraine. We know that the United States has had these conversations with Russia because Ukraine is a puppet, government, a puppet entity, essentially now. We know that they're not pulling the strings. We know Zelensky's not in charge. So the conversations have been had, and they've been had pretty out in the open. We haven't heard, though, the details of these conversations. But if you look at the reporting from February on, conversations have involved cooperation between the United States and Russia. These conversations have involved the Arctic, major cooperation in the Arctic, major cooperation with rare earth minerals in Donbass and Ukraine. And the United States is extremely interested in that because of, obviously, resource extraction. But also we have seen a weird thing happen, which has thrown people off, because simultaneously the EU has increased its tax against Russia. The EU has increased its attacks on the Russian people. They've made it now harder for Russians to travel throughout Europe. For example, to get a visa, a Schengen visa, that's a multiple entry visa. So if you're Russian and you want to get a visa, it's going to be next to impossible to get a multiple entry visa. You're going to have to provide your entire itinerary. You have to even provide your bank account, all of this stuff, right? And so it's gotten worse between the EU and Russia, but it's gotten better between Russia and the United States. And we have heard this both from the Putin administration and the Trump administration. So Putin's people have constantly said that they're glad that they're having a conversation with Donald Trump, because with Joe Biden, you couldn't even have this conversation before. It was like impossible to even have this conversation. So looking at what we just talked about with the focus in Africa, and previously we've talked about the focus in the Middle East, right? The U.S. threatening Iraq, and their elections were this Sunday, by the way. They had some elections this Sunday. And according to Iraq, everything went according to plan. We have also seen, of course, Israel advance into Lebanon and attack Lebanon, southern Lebanon in particular. And we have also simultaneously seen the United States attack Latin America, in particular Venezuela and Colombia. So all of this is happening at the same time. Donald Trump needs to end this war in Ukraine one way or another during his administration, during his presidency. And one of the main guys that is Putin's top advisor, especially in dealing with economics, is Dmitriev. Can we bring him up right here? Let's talk about Dmitriev. Now, I want to bring him up, Kirill Dmitriev, because he is, I think, somebody that a lot of people may not know. Now, you've seen him with an interview with Laura Logan. You've seen him do interviews on mainstream media. Before I go into this, you can keep it there. He always talks about the connections that the United States and Russia have when it comes to Christian values. Now, all of this is related to everything Pasta just talked about. Kirill Dmitriev has been retweeting a lot of the anti-woke, I don't know, left-wing stuff. He has even retweeted Tommy Robinson in the UK. He has been promoting this idea that, Russia and the United States have these constant, this alignment together. Cultural, and of course, referring,
Is it like a cultural, religious alignment?
Well, I would say like a cultural Christian value, right? Like the Christian values, right? Now, what he's referring to is the fact that he's looking at America as a Christian nation. He's looking at Russia as a Christian nation. Now, this is what he posted recently. He said, "New, real Donald Trump on Ukraine. I think we have made a lot of progress. Productive 3-day meeting in the U.S. with Stephen Witkoff last week discussed path to peace, trade, economic cooperation, and the U.S. proposal to prohibit Nazi ideology in Ukraine. More progress soon." Kirill Dmitriev is not speaking out of his ass. He's actually the Stephen Witkoff of Putin, okay? Wow. So while Lavrov is Marco Rubio, he is like the Stephen Witkoff. He's out there trying to have conversations and make deals. And let's hear what Donald Trump said before we move on, and let's go back to his Wikipedia page. So let's hear what Donald Trump said on this, and then we'll discuss.
3 months ago, my administration also brokered a historic peace agreement between nearby Armenia and Azerbaijan, one of the 8 wars that we ended in 8 months. At that time, 8 months, we're looking to end one more, if that's possible, Russia and Ukraine. We haven't gotten there yet, but I think we've made a lot of progress. 3 months ago.
So the way, first of all, I want to say Azerbaijan thing. That Azerbaijan thing, it's long been like this. It's just now coming out in terms of Azerbaijan having, other relationships with the U.S. and the West. I mean, this has been already there. It's just not. They're making it more of a big deal than what it is. A lot of people are. So a lot of people will look at that and they're like, "Oh my God, Donald Trump is full of it. He's not interested in really resolving this with Russia." And the thing is, the deep state is really never going to look at Russia as an equal. They're never going to give them a good deal. They're never going to, actually be fair and try to end some sort of war that's been just decades and decades, because they look at Russia as they've looked at Russia as a threat. However, when we look at the conversations that have been having, while a lot of people poo-poo that, the reality is how Russia is and what Russia wants. Now, as somebody that's been living here for now 3 years, the Russian government is an extremely pragmatic government. Now, it's not a monolith. When I talk about, for example, Vladimir Putin and his administration and how they look at things, they look at things in the interest of Russia. They look at things as advancing economically, advancing diplomatically. They've said it many times. They want to be friends with everybody. This is why you see Russia having an open relationship that they're even promoting outright with Israel. They've been having that relationship for years, for decades, with now Jelani or Al-Shara, the former head chopper, former Al-Qaeda, who they rolled out the red carpet for. because they see that relationship as a necessity to advance their interests in keeping their bases, okay, in Syria. And in order for them to keep their bases in Syria, they have to have a relationship with the new government in Syria. They have to have a relationship with Israel, and they also have to engage in conversations with the United States. And that is a fact. You cannot keep your relationship in your bases in Syria without that, because Syria has been carved up and is being currently carved up among NATO, among Israel, and also, of course, clearly Russia has a stake in all of this.
I have a question.
Yeah, go ahead. You laugh, so I kind of want to know why you laugh.
No, I have because I'm laughing because I got questions here, and I don't want you to move on until I have these questions. Okay, so listen, I think what I've learned since you've been in Russia about Russia's relationship, how different it is. You used to say the term, it's not always roses, right? However, you were very cautious about what you're saying because you're not a Russian citizen. You feel fine criticizing America because this is where you're born and you have the right to hold that country accountable. But your feeling was, well, it's not always all roses over here, meaning like the people, the ideologues who, you know, wear their Che Guevara shirt or their Lenin shirt and all that stuff really don't understand the inner workings of what's going on in Russia. You're explaining today, we're talking about this guy, Kirill Dmitriev, right? Like, I think it was great the way you explained that he's the Witkoff over there. And he thinks we're aligned because of these Christian Judaic values of sorts and stuff. Because that's also something else I learned is that Russia will always recognize Israel. Yeah, they might not fund the genocide and give them the weapons to do so, or give them a lot of weapons to you know, for their Iron Dome the way we do, but they'll provide some, and they'll always recognize what's going on. So I understand that there's a relationship, and even Lavrov, who comes off as like a very pro-Zionist person at times, but not. There's a relationship going on between Russia and Israel, whether it be a kind of like, remember in Colombia, that German dude who was like, couldn't talk bad about Israel at all because there's kind of like that stain of Germany of what they did. So they always have to be in this position of like being apologetic and never being criticized, critical of Israel because of their role, what Germany played and the killing of so many Jews. Well, I feel like Russians have that kind of same kind of mentality of sorts because of the pogroms that took place, which even kind of like assisted or led to some of the rightfulness of, you know, Zionists to say, hey, we need a land in, you know, of our own because we're getting killed and slaughtered in parts of, you know, Russia, right? Like before the you know, the Russian times, before the, you know, the Putin's government and what Russia is today. They have that kind of relationship. Okay, we understand all that there. Russia has a relationship with Israel and whatnot. But when, at what time led to the 86ing of the Assad government by Russia? So much to the fact that they had to go and align themselves with the new government coming in to keep these bases is what you're saying. What happened exactly to say, okay, we're done with Assad now, we're moving on? Was it something where they saw it happening and like, we have no choice? If we don't make an alignment with Jolani and the new government, we can lose a lot of our foothold over there. Maybe some of the corridors you talked about. I don't know, fam. Is there something that happened where Russia said enough, we have to 86 Assad, or was it naturally happening and they were just going with the flow?
Yeah, I mean, I think both are true, right? Like this is a conversation I've had at length with Vanessa, and this is something that she's probably one of the most well-equipped people to talk about, because it was quite complex, and it's not like, you know, the Russians were shooting down as some have claimed out there. The Russians were shooting at Syrian, you know, at Syrian military forces, but it's like they had long stepped off already. There were conversations that were had prior to the fall of Assad that pretty much looked like there was a deal made for Russia to step off. Also, the push of Assad towards the Gulf, because remember, Russia also has a relationship with Saudi Arabia, with Qatar, and these are actually the factions that directly are being used to push Greater Israel, to basically attack and isolate Iran. It is literally stated everywhere, but especially in WikiLeaks, in the emails between Hillary Clinton and I forget who, but she was emailing back and forth. And these are in the leaked WikiLeaks emails that specifically they were going to use the Gulf, Saudi Arabia, to isolate Iran and eventually then attack Syria, get rid of Assad, and then go after Lebanon in order to be able to open up the expansion of Greater Israel, implement the David's Corridor, and essentially expand Israel beyond that. So what we're seeing happen now is literally what they said in those emails. But Russia has always acted as a neutral, I guess a neutral sector, a neutral player in the region. But by not doing anything, by not, for example, shooting down Israeli warplanes that they could have done many times, they are effectively aiding Israel in that way, right? And so they look at it as like, we need to do whatever we need to do to protect the Russian people and our interests. And that's what we're going to do. And you could say that that's fine because, every country should be looking to protect the interests of their people. It's a very nationalist point of view, but it's a point of view that in a way could be respected based on the history of Russia and everything they've gone through and all of that. However, is it ultimately going to benefit them in the long run? Not necessarily. My issue with people is how they've looked at Russia as still being the Soviet Union, still having this ideologically anti-imperialist point of view, which the current administration does not have. You could have said that the Soviet Union had an idealistic, ideology-based point of view, but Putin does not. They're looking at things very pragmatically, and you can criticize that or you can justify it in any way you want. But what I'm saying is that is their realpolitik is that it is extremely pragmatic. It is not based on ideology. Now, somebody brought up Iran. They don't have a defense pact with Iran. They don't have a defense pact with Iran. They have a strategic partnership, which is entirely different. That means that if somebody, say Israel or the United States, attack Iran, kind of like they already did, Russia can choose to aid with certain weapons like they did in Syria. But guess what? Those weapons were not used because people had to be trained for them. So the weapons that are reportedly being sent to Venezuela, unless Russia sends people to actually train the Venezuelans how to use them, the Venezuelans won't be able to use them. So while, for example, the way they move is if our allies benefit from this strategic move, that's great. If they don't, well, we need to keep moving as this is the approach. Now, that's the more, I would say, political aspect of Russia right now. The military aspect, when it comes to Ukraine and the United States, is highly, highly critical in many ways of Putin, because they look at, why are you talking to Donald Trump? Why aren't you being more aggressive towards Ukraine? Why aren't we moving on this issue? Why aren't we shutting this down right now? Like they don't want these conversations. They're looking at these conversations with Trump and being like, what are you doing? Why are we wasting time with the Americans? The Americans aren't interested in the well-being of Russia. They're not interested in peace. And they're right in a way. Like they're not. Like the deep state, again, is not. Now, is Russia the main adversary to the United States right now? No, China is. And if there can be an attempt to eventually create a sort of, competition and an ability for the US to compete against China, they're going to do whatever they can. Russia has proven to be a very valuable, very effective player. They have proven to be far mightier than the EU and NATO. I mean, right now, if I'm an outsider and I'm looking at what Russia's done with their military, what they've been able to do to sustain sanctions in spite of, yes, like sanctions always hurt at some point, but they've been able to, at a global level, I would say more than at domestic level, but at a global level, fight off the sanctions well. They've been able to have their people live, for the most part, free. I mean, people in Moscow live like there's no war going on. You don't feel it, you don't see it, kind of like in the US. So they've been able to achieve that. So if I'm Washington, I'm looking at them as a major player. And when you look at what BRICS is promoting, they're promoting a multipolar world. That includes Saudi Arabia. And I have to say that again, the entity that commits human rights violations, that is one of the most horrible it is included in BRICS. You have India. That could also be argued of Modi's presidency. You also have Brazil. You have South Africa. You have Russia. You have China. What does a multipolar world mean? It means literally multiple powers at the helm. And that is what they're pushing. They're pushing the UN Charter, which is essentially the UN, the type of organization of the UN. So now, after saying all of this is just a beginning, because I could be here all day trying to like get across like a lot of the differences and nuances, because again, Russia's not a monolith. There are different parties here with different beliefs. Putin's current, the people around him, though, are primarily conservative in terms of social values, right? And that's not necessarily a bad thing. And nobody's here is criticizing that aspect at all. But it's the reality of looking at it as it is, rather as we would like it to be. People think that Russia is going to come to the rescue of the resistance, and that's not their mentality at all. Their mentality is, let's expand, let's work with everybody, let's have, you know, in spite of our supposed allyship, we're going to do what we need to do for our people. And they also have a base, by the way, in Africa as well. So a lot of this is never talked about. Anything to say before I go into Dmitriev? Because
this is so interesting, because the two things I have to say is, so you're saying when it comes to Russia, like hesitating on shooting down Israeli warplanes, their non-interventionism was actually them choosing a side, right? They could have done this, but
they're never going to attack Israel. Yeah. They believe in a two-state solution. That's their bottom line. They're not going to go after Israel. Some of them, Russia's most powerful oligarchs are Israeli. Some of Russia's, I would say, cultural centers. We have an autonomous Jewish zone in Russia. I mean, you have almost 2 million Russians living in Israel. You have this relationship, and it's not been hidden. Russia's never hid. That's the thing about them. They won't hide what they're doing. They're not hiding it. They're not necessarily highlighting it, but they're not hiding it. It's out there. People have decided to not talk about these giant elephants in the room and pretend they don't exist, because I guess it doesn't serve
America.
the purpose of what they're talking about. But if you talk to regular Russians and local Russians, you get a different picture. Like, is Russia a Christian nation? No. You have a lot of people who are not religious at all, but you get promoted that all this orthodoxy. Yeah, some people follow it, but not everybody. So it's just kind of and also, and that happens with the LGBT stuff too. It's like, yes, there are gay people in Russia, but they don't just go around promoting it. Yeah. It's just a different aspect. And I think you all get one lens. So you either get the lens from NATO that's like mainstream media says, Putin is Hitler and he's going to go and take over the world and he's just awful and he's out there shooting gay people. That's what you get from the Western media. But then you get the other side that's just everything is perfect in Russia because I'm a Westerner that makes a lot of money, and of course it's going to be cheaper for me in Russia, duh. But you don't need to hear about that. You're just going to get promoted this idea, and you're going to get promoted that everything everybody is just perfectly aligned politically, and that's just not the case. And so I, as a journalist, wouldn't be doing my job if I wasn't promoting a more substantial, a more full picture of what it actually is. And that's kind of where I'm going with this. It's we need to really understand our biases and the way we like to view things versus what things actually are. And again, this NATO narrative is false, but so is everything is peaches and perfect. And the same with the China people. The China people, China's perfect. No place is perfect, guys. Literally not a single place. Okay. And I would say the closest place to that must be Nicaragua. I mean, in terms of I
want to move
so many things, and we could go into that. But okay, let me
make this last question though. I have one last question, because that was all right. So I get what you're saying there. All right. So you're saying that you're a multipolar world. What is that exactly? It's other superpowers, Brazil, Russia, India, China. They're, once again, not all roses over there. But if we are still comparing the two, And maybe it should be like politics in the United States. We don't have to vote Republican or Democrat. There's a third choice. Go over there, look at the third choice. It's on your ballot. I don't want to hear anything about it. It's there. Shut up. Don't tell me that you got to vote for one of the lesser two evils. Otherwise, you're not doing your duty. There's a third choice. Go look at it. Can the same thing be said if you're looking at this multipolar world? Because if you're still looking at those other superpowers, Brazil, Russia, India, China, South America, their behavior is still very different than the United States, Israel, and Europe, where they have all these other bases. They drop bombs, the constant regime change, the meddling and stuff. I understand there's something going on, and you're pointing out that example with Vanessa talking about the way China is kind of like manipulating things in the Sudan. But that behavior of those other superpowers still is not equivalent to what the West is doing, and United States, Israel, where they have all these bases and these colonization projects going on, and they're killing somebody. Isn't it still better with those BRICS nations and stuff with simply their anti-imperialistic behavior?
I don't think so you're saying a couple things here. Nobody said it was worse or that it's the same. There are people there who say, Russia and China are just as imperialist as the United States. I wouldn't say that, but I would say that they are building upon their expansionism is geared. It's working in a global capitalist system. I reject the idea now, after so much that I've been reading on China, that they're not engaged in capitalism. They're 100% absolutely engaged in capitalism, maybe not at the domestic level that people, are looking at, but their economy and their global expansion is very much a capitalist, it's capitalist driven. And Russia is obviously a capitalist country. I know that's a wake up call to many, but it is a very, very capitalist country. And there's so many things that I will do deep dives on, guys. But the thing is, like, it's not the same as the United States. You're absolutely right. The United States and Israel, they go in and take what they want, no questions asked. Russia, China, much more diplomatic in how they conduct their affairs. That's always been the case. They're not going to go in and just, full right attack. We always say this phrase, you catch more bees with honey. So their approach is entirely different. Their approach is diplomatic. Their approach is one that attempts to respect sovereignty. However, they do have their moments where I would say that there is like exploitation and expansion, especially honestly in China. I've seen that more in terms of Africa. So when it comes to Russia, we just see the expansion in Syria, the attempts to keep their bases. Now there might be a Russian-controlled part of Syria, which, if that happens, that's definitely working with the U.S. and Israel to make that happen. So if that does happen, it will be better, for example, for Syrians. They might be able to go back home because Russia is better than having Zionists or jihadists control the region. That is a fact. I mean, nobody's arguing that. But did some people suffer and have to fall for that to happen? Yeah. Are they taking advantage of the situation? Yeah. Like, so it's like, it's like we're not chastising here. We're not poo-pooing, Russia in that way, but I'm painting like a realistic picture of what it is, rather than, I don't know. In my opinion, the analysis coming from a lot of people is just fawning over. There's no actual analysis of how things are going. It's more of like analysis of like how much greater Russia is or how much greater China is. It's not, yeah. And so, okay, so China's economy is controlled by the Communist Party, not the capitalist class. So China is different. Okay, so it's controlled by the Communist Party, which is engaging in global capitalism and resource extraction and supplying Saudi Arabia weapons, supplying Israel. It's a lot of what it's using to continue its genocide. It's resource extracting in Africa. And so, yeah, I mean, I don't have time. We're not going to have time to go deep on that, but I definitely would love to have a discussion on that for sure. Yes, China has lifted its people out of poverty. It's got a lot of great things about it. I'm not against China. I'm not these people that are.
But it's not all roses, fam, right?
But it's not. I'm not going to ignore
the
reality of what else is happening. And I'm also not going to tell people that they need to be angry at China and rise up and no, that, or Russia. I mean, like, I would never do that. That's ridiculous. These are sovereign countries, and the people there have the right to make those decisions. I am a resident, though, of Russia. You know, I do live here and I do know what I'm talking about. But at the same time, like, you know, I do always make an effort to say these are sovereign countries. You know, this is a perspective of mine, but it's also one that I would say is rooted in being here and surrounded by Russians that aren't only political or of the political class, which is an extremely different thing. And I think people only get that one message. So possibly, before we're here all night, because I think this is interesting and I knew it would be, I want to go into Dmitriev. So let's pull up his Wikipedia again. Let's just pull that up. I'm going to go through that. I'm just going to look at a couple things here. So this is Putin's top advisor. And if you didn't know he was Putin's top advisor, how would you look at this differently? Okay. So this is Kirill Alexandrovich Dmitriev. Okay. He was born in Ukraine when Ukraine was part of the Soviet Union, by the way. So he's a Russian CEO and businessman, and you can find this outside of Wikipedia. Wikipedia was just like the easiest thing. That's why I'm using it. I don't rely on Wikipedia, but it just had everything on there. He was a part of the Russian Direct Investment Fund. Now, the Russian Direct Investment Fund also had an American part, okay? And he was educated in both Harvard and Stanford. He got his BA in Stanford and then his MBA in Harvard. Those are two of the intelligence sectors where, you know, a lot of the intelligence people get their education from. Now, I want to move on to how he was recruited by McKinsey when he first graduated Harvard. So he worked for McKinsey. He then worked in a consultancy called Los Angeles, Moscow, and Prague. He became very, very like influential in not just Russian business, but he pretty much stuck his tentacles all over the American corporate sector, including Goldman Sachs, where he was an investment banker in Goldman Sachs. Then the U.S. Russian Investment Fund was also created while he worked for a private equity firm there. Then he even went on to work for General Electric. He went on and on and on. And in 2010, he was named as a young global leader by the World Economic Forum.
Is this in the
Yeah.
Can you move down, Jayme? And we're kind of looking. You got to scroll this a little bit. She's been talking about this down.
So
below.
just a little bit, yeah. If you go there, you can see what I said, and then just scroll down a little bit more. There it is. Recruited by McKinsey. Okay. Transition to Goldman Sachs as an investment banker. Okay, I'll just follow Jayme. Jayme, if you can just scroll down a little bit so that way you guys know what I'm looking at. In 2010, the World Economic Forum selected him to be a young global leader. And then he was elected as vice president of the Russian Union of Industrialists and Entrepreneurs. Okay, so if you can go down a little bit more. Okay, let's see here. No, down. I think, okay, yeah. Wait, okay, hold on. Sorry, go back. You're going way too fast. Way too fast. Hold on, let me see if I can find what I was looking for here. Blah, blah. So, right under the Russian Direct Investment Fund, I just want to point out that he also has heavily invested with his petroleum. He was also working for Gazprom. He's also the head of that, among others. But he was also working with Saudi Arabia, the UAE, China, Qatar, and Kuwait. Okay, so these are other partners he's had. Also, BlackRock, One Equity Partners, Goldman Sachs, Dutch Bank. And he had, of course, a good relationship, very close relationship with Mohammed bin Salman. So Russia, again, in general, the Russian political class has had a relationship with Saudi Arabia. If you go down to there, you can just stop there. I'll look at that right now real quickly. So in Russia, Gazprom is probably one of the biggest things. Gazprom is the gas. Then Gazprom Bank is the bank that one of the major banks in Russia. So he's involved in pretty much every aspect of the upper echelons of Russia. He was involved in politics in the Duma. Now, if you go scroll down to under other activities, I just want to highlight this part here. In January 2017, okay, right there, Dmitriev met with Eric Prince, the founder of the private military company Blackwater, George Nader, and the UAE Crown Prince Mohammed bin Zayed Al Nahyan, known as MBZ. So this meeting was representing the transition team of Donald Trump. So I just want to pretty much highlight that by saying his relationship with Donald Trump goes back further than this current administration. It goes back to the former administration. And I just want to highlight that because this is nothing new. He's had a relationship with Trump, and he's had a relationship not just with Trump, but with like key sectors in the US government, key corporate sectors. So his whole agenda, like what he is tasked to do, right? And they go talk about his relationship with Jared Kushner, Stephen Witkoff, Robert Mueller. They go a little bit deeper in that. But what I want to just highlight here is it's no surprise that he's the guy to form these sort of attempts at having conversations about cooperation between the United States and Russia. There's a lot of things that he's had his hands in terms of his influence. He's a very well related person. He knows a lot of people. He's had a lot of experience in economic sectors, very corporate and important economic sectors, right? All over the United States and in Russia. So he understands the Russian perspective and he understands the American perspective, and he understands how those could possibly come together. So from that aspect, of course, that's like a pragmatic aspect to be like, okay, this is a go-to guy. But what does that tell you of where Russia is going in terms of the United States? Having this guy be the one that's leading the charge. This guy is not anti-US. This guy is not anti-imperialist. This guy is not anti-corporate. This guy is in favor of normalizing with the United States. Putin is not dumb. He's not going to have somebody that he doesn't trust or who doesn't follow his vision in charge, unless, of course, he wouldn't be in charge, which I wouldn't say that, to be honest, at this point. And so the people around him have specific roles and important roles. And the Russians have, when they voice themselves to the world, they seem put together. They know what they're talking about. They don't say things without having thought about them, like for a long time. You know, when they make a move, it's a move that they've thought of. They don't do things impulsively. Nothing they do is impulsive. Everything from the bureaucratic system to everything you see in government is not impulsive. It is thought out. It is detailed. It is tediously planned in a sense of just, it might be chaotic and disorganized to a degree, but what's put out there is thought through. Whereas, you know, we can be very organized in some aspects, like from a Western American Anglo perspective, and we would like just give up with Russia's chaoticness. But when it comes to putting ourselves out there and saying what we say, we don't think twice and we just like blare it out, right? So it's an interesting dynamic. Kirill Dmitriev wouldn't be in the position he's in if he wasn't selected specifically for having the knowledge of the ins and outs of the United States, and with the key people he's had conversations with. Now, if you looked at his resume or everything you read just now, if everything you saw, and you didn't know he was Putin's guy, what would you guys think about him? It's a question I want to ask you, fam, to start.
Well, I mean, I think right off the bat, when you look at this guy, you wouldn't think that's this guy. You think that he would be Putin's opposition, from what we've been told. Not
right.
Putin's. You wouldn't think he's his guy, but I think you exposed it, and I think you've also. I mean, this makes so much sense of a lot of the media stuff that's been happening and the people they've been backing over there. They want this cultural Christian shit there, and I can understand why some of the generals would be kind of a little ticked off with the Russian Federation and Putin.
Yeah, yeah.
So this guy would be his opposition. BlackRock? Okay, no.
You would think that. I literally am not surprised at all, because it makes sense to me now, knowing what I know and understanding what I know, because a lot of people have created this idea of Russia being what it isn't.
Yeah.
And you should respect and feel however you want about Russia, but it is what it is. Like, it is not what we should make it out to be, whether that's positive or negative. And for me, there's a lot of I love about Russia and Russians, and the culture and a lot of things. And there's a lot of things I agree with Putin on, and there's some things I don't agree with him on. But regardless, I'm not a Russian. I'm not here to tell Russians what they should or shouldn't think. I'm speaking to Americans who have created a picture of Russia, or the so-called anti-imperialists who assume that Russia is going to act in an ideological way that it isn't. It is a pragmatic actor in the global system, and at least in terms of the current Putin, administration, I would say. And so it's important that we get rid of our biases. It's important that we look at the facts and look at how things are operating to understand things, to not be blindsided when certain things happen. When, for example, I've been saying, Russia wants to normalize with the United States. Russia wants to normalize with the United States. It's because they're doing it in their own way. Is that going to benefit Russia? In my opinion, no. At the end of the day, there are some things that we do that are more efficient, but the reality is it comes at a cost. It comes at a cost of losing your identity. It comes at the cost of having U.S. intervention. It comes at the cost of a lot of things. And when you have a guy that was named a World Economic Forum young global leader advising Putin, who has worked with Eric Prince, Blackwater, who's had his hands in McKinsey, BlackRock, does that worry me in terms of where Russia's going? Absolutely. If this was anybody else, the majority of progressives and leftists or multipolar people would be like, oh my God, get this guy out of here. That's what they would say. But because it's Russia, they sort of ignored it. And so that you're not getting the full analysis here. If you're missing that chunk, because you're not going to understand the next few moves that are coming. So I think it's important that you all know who this guy is and what he's been doing, and just go on his Twitter and you'll get a wide picture of him, whatever it is you might think. But for me, it's just important to highlight it and to talk about it. Do I think it kind of points to what Russia wants in terms of the U.S.? Absolutely. And I think that's why that's why we are seeing an effort from the Putin administration to end this war, because they see it as a necessity to end it, not just for themselves, but in terms of the war, but in terms of just, okay, let's make some economic deals. Let's build on this cooperation. That will be looked on or twisted as being a positive thing. Right? We're seeing that already. Russia and America can be friends. But for me, as somebody that loves Russia, that really appreciates a lot of things about it, I always caution, because I don't trust the U.S. deep state to ever look at Russia as an equal partner. Russia wants a seat at the table, guys. They don't want to turn over the table and take it on and light it on fire. That's not who they are. That may have been the Soviet Union. That is no longer the Russian Federation. The Russian Federation is the Russian Federation. They're not the Soviet Union. They don't want to blow everything up. They want to have conversations. They want a seat at the table. They want to compete in a global market. Whatever you may think of that, it's a normal thing to want as a state, as a sovereign entity, right? In an ideological sense, moral sense, we can fault this and that, whatever. And I can have those conversations as well. But in a sense of just looking at it from a logical basis, that's the majority of what countries are doing, including China, including Russia, including a lot of these countries that are trying to survive. And you also have to add the fact that the United States, of course, has been completely vilifying Russia for a long time. And that is a fact that is not, that's undeniable. But even so, there is a desire from Moscow, to have a good relationship with the United States. And the fact that nobody's talking about this, that people are literally just like completely ignoring it, it just signals to me like people are either purposely ignoring it because it doesn't serve their narrative or just like unaware of it. So there I am making it aware. I don't know.
I think it's a little bit of column A and a little bit of column B, fam. So interesting stuff. It really, I have a different perspective even as today. On how to look at things, and like I said, I can understand why the military might be a little bit pissed off at what the Russian Federation is doing, understanding that, hey, man, they're never going to be nice to us. They're never going to play ball. They're always going to try to balkanize us. Let's just cut them off. We can't do business with them. Why are you talking to Donald Trump? But there's multiple players going on, and I can understand that they want a seat at the table because they also have 10 or 11 time zones, right? They probably got a lot of resources and stuff they want to sell to the global market, and you can get the best price from America because they'll pay the highest price. So why not get that money? Why not plug in? So, back in the days, I thought Putin at one point wanted to join NATO, right?
He did twice.
So, come on. This is not too far-fetched to see what's going on, especially when you're laying it out with this guy. So I'm going to pay attention to when Putin's hanging around with this guy, see if they're in the same pictures together, and then say, oh, there we go. We can see what's going on. But great stuff, fam.